The lake had always been my escape. Tucked away between tall pines and soft rippling water, my small cabin was a place I built with my own hands years ago, a quiet refuge from the chaos of city life. There were no gates, no board meetings, no petty rules about mailbox colors or lawn heights. Just the sound of wind through the trees and the crackle of a fire at night. The land sat outside the boundaries of any housing association, miles away from the nearest neighborhood. That's why I was caught completely off guard when a woman with a clipboard and a power walk attitude came stomping down my dirt road one Friday morning like she owned the place. She was the kind of person you could recognize instantly: perfectly styled hair, oversized sunglasses, and that distinct air of self-importance. I'd met her kind before, but never on my property. I was out front splitting some firewood when I heard the sharp sound of heels crunching over gravel. "Excuse me," she called out in a tone that already made my patience waver. I turned, axe still in hand, and saw her standing by the edge of the driveway, arms crossed. "Can I help you?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. She looked me up and down like I was some sort of intruder. "Yes," she said, flipping open her clipboard. "I'm Karen, president of the Pine Hollow Homeowners Association. You're in violation of several of our community codes." I blinked, thinking I must have misheard her. "Community codes?" I repeated slowly. "Ma'am, I think you've got the wrong property. This cabin isn't part of Pine Hollow." She smirked like she'd dealt with this 100 times before. "Oh, people always say that, but if you're within 3 miles of the subdivision, you fall under our shared land use policy. We've extended the HOA map. You should have received a notice." That's when I realized she was serious. I put the axe down and walked closer. "Let me stop you right there," I said calmly. "I built this cabin 15 years ago on private land I own outright. It's not under your HOA. It never was and never will be." Her eyes narrowed. "Sir, I'm not here to debate property lines. Your cabin's paint color violates our natural tone policy, and that dock you've built exceeds the allowed dimensions for lakeside structures." I actually laughed at that point. "You've got to be kidding me," I said. "You're telling me what color my cabin can be on land your HOA doesn't even control?" She gave a thin smile. "The rules are for the good of the community. We can't have people doing whatever they want. It affects property values." Now, I'm not easily angered, but something about the way she said "people like you" set me off. "Listen," I said, stepping closer, "this isn't your community. This is private land owned under a different jurisdiction. You have no authority here." She scoffed. "Oh, we'll see about that. I'll be filing a formal violation, and you'll be hearing from our board." With that, she turned on her heel and stormed off, muttering something about how I'd regret not cooperating. I watched her go, half amused and half annoyed, wondering what kind of delusion drove someone to think they could just expand their HOA territory by walking farther down a dirt road. For the next week, I didn't think much of it. I figured she'd look up the county records, realize her mistake, and drop it. But then the letters started. First, a notice of violation taped to my cabin door. Then another one in my mailbox, which was technically on county-maintained road property, not even within the supposed HOA boundary. The letters accused me of non-compliant exterior paint, unauthorized dock construction, and unapproved vehicle storage, meaning my old fishing boat parked beside the cabin. I couldn't believe it. The nerve of this woman to try and enforce fines on land that didn't belong to her. I called the county clerk's office just to be sure, and they confirmed what I already knew: my cabin sat completely outside any HOA zone, protected by private ownership rights. They even laughed when I explained the situation. She's got no jurisdiction over you, the clerk said. You could build a pink castle with a neon roof if you wanted to. That made me chuckle, but it also gave me an idea. I decided I'd play it calm. No yelling, no threats, just facts. I sent the HOA a letter myself, certified mail, stating in simple legal terms that they had no authority to issue citations or enter my property. I attached copies of my deed, property line maps, and a note that said, any further trespass will be reported to law enforcement. A few days later, I saw her SUV creeping down my gravel road again. This time, she had another woman in the passenger seat, both holding their clipboards like badges of honor. I stood on the porch, arms folded, watching them park near the gate. They didn't even make it halfway up the drive before I called out, I already told you you're trespassing. Karen ignored me, striding right up to the fence. You can't intimidate me, she said sharply. The HOA has authority here, whether you like it or not. I raised an eyebrow. Really, you sure about that? She hesitated just long enough for me to know she wasn't sure at all. We'll have this settled, she said. Our legal team will handle it. That was fine by me. Let her waste her time. But the next part surprised me. A few neighbors from Pine Hollow started driving by more often, slowing down to stare at the cabin. Word must be spread that the HOA president was trying to bring me under control. A few of them even apologized quietly when I ran into them at the gas station, saying they didn't agree with her. Apparently, she'd been terrorizing the whole neighborhood for years, issuing fines for trash cans being visible or flower beads being too colorful. It was a power trip disguised as community management. I thought the whole thing would blow over soon. I didn't know then that she'd take it even further. She started showing up when I wasn't home, leaving inspection notices stuck to the door, each one more aggressive than the last. Then one morning, I found muddy footprints near my back deck, the kind that didn't belong to me. Someone had tried to peek inside the windows. I checked my security camera, and there she was, Karen, snooping around my property, taking photos with her phone. That's when I realized this wasn't just about some delusional HOA president. This was personal. She couldn't stand being told no. She wanted control, even over land that was never hers to govern. And as much as I wanted to deal with it quietly, fate had something else in store. Because the next time she decided to trespass, she picked the worst possible moment, the day I was meeting with someone far more powerful than her entire HOA combined. She had no idea that when she burst through that door, she'd walk right into a room with the state attorney general himself. The morning started quiet, the kind of calm that usually makes me forget the world beyond the lake even exists. The fog was still lifting off the water, and I was brewing a pot of coffee when my phone buzzed with a message. It was from the State Attorney General's office, confirming our meeting at the cabin that afternoon. I had worked with their department for years on a consulting basis, handling land and environmental compliance projects, and today's meeting was about a conservation initiative tied to the surrounding lakes. It was an important discussion, one I wanted to keep private and professional. The Attorney General, Mark Holden, wasn't just a state official, he was also an old friend from college. He'd driven out here himself to get away from the cameras and bureaucracy. We'd planned to meet at my cabin precisely because it was quiet and away from prying eyes. At least, that was the plan until Karen showed up again. By early afternoon, I had everything ready. Documents neatly stacked on the table, coffee pot filled, and a small spread of snacks for the meeting. The sound of tires crunching on the gravel road told me Mark had arrived. I stepped out onto the porch as he climbed out of his black SUV, dressed down in jeans and a jacket, the kind of attire that made him look more like a weekend fisherman than one of the state's top legal officials. "Beautiful spot you've got here," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "Almost makes me forget about the mess waiting back at the office." I laughed. "That's the point. No politics, no reporters, just a quiet place to talk about the project." We went inside, spread out the paperwork, and started reviewing environmental maps, budget allocations, and permits related to the lake's shoreline management. It was going smoothly until I heard something that made both of us freeze. It was the sound of footsteps on gravel, too quick and too heavy to be from someone just passing by. I frowned, standing up. Mark glanced toward the window. "Expecting someone else?" he asked. "Not at all," I said, moving toward the front door. Through the curtain, I could see that same familiar SUV, the one that had become the symbol of annoyance and intrusion over the last few weeks. Karen had returned. And this time, she wasn't just standing at the gate. She was marching right up the front steps like she owned the place. Before I could even open the door, I heard the handle rattle, followed by the sharp click of the latch turning. My stomach tightened. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered. The door flew open, and in stormed Karen, her expression a mix of righteous fury and entitlement. "I've had enough of this nonsense," she snapped. "You've ignored multiple notices, and I'm not leaving until we get this resolved." Mark stood from his seat, his posture calm but curious, while I took a deep breath, trying to keep my temper in check. "You just broke into my cabin," I said slowly. "Do you even realize how illegal that is?" She waved a dismissive hand. "Don't start with your property rights talk again. This building violates community standards, and I will not let it stand." Mark raised an eyebrow. "Community standards," he repeated. I wasn't aware the state had delegated private cabin design to homeowners associations. She turned toward him, looking him up and down like he was just another resident siding with me. "This has nothing to do with you, sir. I'm dealing with a repeat violator who refuses to comply with the HOA's rules." Mark's eyes met mine, and I could see the disbelief slowly turn into amusement. He leaned against the counter, clearly intrigued to see how far she was going to dig her own hole. "And what exactly are these rules?" he asked in a tone that was polite but sharp enough to cut through her confidence. Karen straightened her clipboard and began her spiel. "This cabin's exterior color is not within approved guidelines. The dock on the lake exceeds our community's maximum length regulation. There are unauthorized modifications that affect our collective property values, and this homeowner has ignored multiple violation notices issued by the Pine Hollow HOA." She spoke like she was reciting scripture, her voice laced with arrogance and certainty. I crossed my arms, letting her rant. "Karen," I said finally, "you've been told repeatedly that this property isn't part of your HOA. You're trespassing, and now you've forced your way inside my home during a private meeting." She turned toward me, clearly irritated. "You can't hide behind semantics. I know how property boundaries work, and the map I have right here," she flipped through her papers, "dramatically shows this area as part of our extended jurisdiction." Mark took a step forward, his calm expression unchanged. "May I see that map?" he asked politely. She blinked, caught off guard but too proud to refuse. "Of course," she said, handing it over with a huff. Mark studied it for a moment, his lips twitching into what looked suspiciously like a smirk. "This is a printout from Google Maps," he said, holding it up. "There's no official boundary line, no county seal, and no legal description. You realize this doesn't hold any authority, right? The silence that followed was priceless. Karen's face flushed red. Who do you think you are? She snapped. You don't get to question me. That was the moment I'd been waiting for. I stepped aside and gestured toward him. Karen, I said evenly, meet Mark Holden, the state attorney general. The look on her face was something I'll never forget. Her jaw dropped slightly, her bravado evaporating in an instant. The clipboard trembled in her hands as she tried to form words. The Attorney General, she stammered. As in, the State Attorney General. Mark gave her a small, professional smile. That's right. And I'm here today to discuss environmental regulations with Mr. Hale, who happens to own this property legally, I might add. You, however, appear to have entered without permission. Karen's mouth opened and closed like she was searching for a defense. I didn't know, she said finally. No one told me. Mark cut her off, still polite but firm. That's usually why people knock before entering a private residence. He handed her map back. What you've done here qualifies as trespassing and potentially harassment. I'd advise you to leave before the situation escalates further. She blinked rapidly, her confident facade completely gone. I was just trying to enforce rules that don't apply to this property, I interrupted. You've been told this land isn't under your jurisdiction. Now you've broken in during a government meeting. For a moment, it looked like she might argue, but the weight of the situation was too heavy. She turned, mumbling something about misunderstandings, and hurried toward the door. Her SUV's tires spun in the gravel as she sped away, leaving behind a trail of dust and her shredded dignity. Inside, the air felt lighter. Mark chuckled quietly, shaking his head. I've seen plenty of bold people in politics, he said, but that woman takes the cake. You weren't exaggerating. I poured him another cup of coffee, still processing the absurdity of what had just happened. That's HOA Karen for you, I said. Thinks she runs the world, until the real world shows up. Mark grinned. Don't worry, I'll make sure this little adventure doesn't go unnoticed. Trespassing on private land during a state meeting, I think that'll get some attention. I couldn't help but laugh. That's good to hear, I said. Maybe then she'll finally understand that not everything falls under her clipboard's control. As the sun dipped lower behind the trees, the lake shimmered gold through the windows. The tension was gone, replaced by a quiet satisfaction. Karen had finally crossed a line she couldn't talk her way out of, and for once, justice didn't even need a courtroom, it only needed her own arrogance to expose itself. The sound of the SUV's tires spinning out of my driveway still echoed in the trees long after Karen had left, but the silence that followed was heavier than before. Mark and I stood there for a few moments, both staring at the door she had just slammed through. I couldn't tell if I was more annoyed or amused, though the look on her face when he introduced himself as the State Attorney General would replay in my head for years. You know, Mark said finally, setting his coffee cup down, I've seen people make bad legal decisions before, but that woman might have just written herself into a textbook example. I chuckled, rubbing the back of my neck. You think she'll try to come back? He gave a dry laugh. Not unless she enjoys answering to criminal trespass charges. But just to be safe, we'll make sure she understands exactly what line she crossed. He pulled out his phone, stepped out onto the porch, and made a quick call to his office, explaining the situation. I heard him mention words like unauthorized entry, jurisdictional abuse, and possible misuse of authority. By the time he hung up, I could tell things were about to get a lot more serious for Karen than she could ever have imagined. The next morning, the fog lifted from the lake just as my phone buzzed again. It was Mark's assistant. She confirmed that the incident had been officially documented, and the county sheriff's office would be paying the Pine Hollow HOA a visit. Apparently, this wasn't the first time Karen had overstepped her bounds. There were already complaints from other residents about her breaking onto properties to take pictures and issuing fines for things that weren't even in her jurisdiction. My little cabin break-in was just the final straw. I spent the day working on the dock, trying to clear my mind, but part of me couldn't help smiling. Justice was already in motion, and I didn't even have to lift a finger. By late afternoon, I drove into town to grab supplies, and the small talk at the general store was buzzing. Everyone had heard about the HOA president who barged into the wrong cabin. Small towns have a way of spreading news faster than any newspaper could. When I walked up to the counter, the clerk grinned. "You're the guy she went after, right?" he asked. Heard she nearly fainted when she realized who was in that meeting. I laughed softly. "Yeah, that's the one." He shook his head. "We've all had run-ins with her, about time someone stood up to that woman." I didn't feel like a hero, but it was nice to know I wasn't the only one tired of her nonsense. 2 days later, the sheriff's deputy pulled up my driveway. A friendly guy I'd met before named Don stepped out, holding a notepad and wearing that half grin that said he already knew the story. "Afternoon, Mark told me to follow up personally," he said. "You want to walk me through what happened?" I gave him the rundown from start to finish: the trespassing, the letters, the confrontation, and finally her breaking in during my meeting. Don whistled under his breath. "She's lucky she didn't end up in cuffs that day. Kicking in a door while the state attorney general is sitting inside, that's bold, even for an HOA." He jotted down notes, then smiled. "We've got statements from the other homeowners too. Sounds like her little HOA empire's about to crumble." The next week was quiet, almost eerily so. No letters on my door, no SUVs creeping down my road, no self-righteous speeches about property values. The peace felt strange at first, like the air after a long storm. But then one morning, I saw a white sedan roll up to the end of my driveway, one of the county vehicles. A man in a suit stepped out, holding an envelope. He introduced himself as a representative from the state attorney general's office and handed me a letter. "This is just for your records," he said. "The attorney general wanted you to have a copy of the formal notice being sent to the Pine Hollow HOA. They're under state review for overreach and misuse of authority." I nodded, thanking him. When I opened the envelope, I couldn't help but grin. The notice outlined every violation Karen had committed: harassment, trespassing, unauthorized enforcement of non-binding rules, and false representation of jurisdiction. It even mentioned the incident at my cabin, specifically citing that she had interfered with a confidential meeting between a private citizen and a state official. By the end of the week, Pine Hollow was in full panic mode. I heard through the grapevine that an emergency HOA meeting had been called, one that residents were actually excited to attend. They wanted answers. Karen had been dodging calls, avoiding neighbors, and for someone who loved to control everything, she had completely vanished from sight. Some said she tried to shift the blame onto her board members, claiming she thought my property was part of an old annexation plan. But there were no records, no maps, and no paperwork, just her arrogance. When the state investigators showed up at her house, she finally realized it was over. A few days later, I was out fishing on the lake when a local reporter stopped by my dock. "Mind if I ask a few questions?" he said. I wasn't looking for publicity, but he already heard the basics and wanted confirmation. Is it true the HOA president broke into your cabin while you were meeting with the Attorney General? I nodded slowly, choosing my words carefully. That's exactly what happened, I said. But I'm not interested in ruining anyone's life. I just want people to understand that power doesn't give you the right to bully others. The story hit the local paper the next morning, and the headline was almost comical: HOA president faces state review after trespassing on Attorney General's meeting. The fallout was swift. Within a week, the entire HOA board resigned. The Pine Hollow neighborhood voted to dissolve the association entirely, freeing every homeowner from Karen's petty reign of terror. She herself moved out soon after, quietly selling her house and leaving town. Rumor had it she faced multiple fines and a pending civil suit for trespassing. I didn't rejoice or gloat when I heard the news. I just felt a deep sense of relief. The lake was peaceful again, untouched by her interference, and I could finally sit on my porch without worrying about who might come stomping down my driveway with a clipboard. One evening, about a month later, I received a handwritten letter in the mail. It was from Mark. He thanked me for my patience during the ordeal and mentioned how much he appreciated my cooperation. "People like her think authority is something they can invent," he wrote. "But the law has a way of reminding them where the real boundaries are." I folded the letter and set it on my desk beside the stack of old HOA notices Karen had left behind. I thought about burning them but decided to keep one as a reminder, proof of what happens when arrogance meets accountability. The next morning, the sunrise spilled gold across the lake, and everything felt still again. The air smelled of pine and water, and the only sound was the steady rhythm of waves against the dock. I poured myself a cup of coffee and leaned back in the chair, watching the world wake up. The same spot where Karen had once stood shouting about property violations now stood empty and quiet. The cabin was mine again, not just by deed, but by peace of mind. Sometimes justice doesn't come with sirens or courtrooms. Sometimes it arrives in silence, carried by the weight of truth. And as I watched the mist fade from the lake, I realized that no HOA, no self-proclaimed authority, and no clipboard warrior could ever touch what was truly mine again.